allowed to do these things that, maybe the outside perspective is like, oh, that's a little extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as the two consenting adults agree to it, it's fine. It's not traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
It's when someone doesn't consent or feels obligated to do something
Mm-hmm.
where it becomes an issue.
Yep. Hello, everybody. This is Sex Positivity Unfiltered, where we talk about sex and we are not polite about it. My name is Lyndsey Murray.
And I'm Denise Stratton.
And today's topic, we are covering how religious trauma can impact your relationships and your sex life. I think this is a relatively sensitive topic, especially for any of our listeners out there who are religious. We do not want to deter you from listening to this. We are not trying to promote anyone get out of their religion. I just think everything can have its positive benefits and its negative side effects, and religion can very much be sex negative, which is what is part of even talking about sex positivity is like, where does the negativity come in? I think religion can be a huge part of that. And so we're going to discuss that today. But yeah, tell me, Denise, what was it like for you to do your research on this topic and to even have to think about it?
I did not like this topic, Lyndsey. I'm going to be completely 100% honest. Seeing a lot of the testimonials of their trauma and what people went through, it was very triggering, I will say. But yeah, I just like Lyndsey, I want to give a religious disclaimer on, the fact that I grew up with religion. Pretty much my entire adolescent life. But as soon as I became teenage years, my family kind of shied away from it. So from my teenage years to adult years, I haven't had very much religious influence at all. So I'm very ignorant when it comes to religious teachings or things like that, because it's just been so long for me. But yeah, I'll give a little disclaimer saying that I think there are very many benefits to religion and faith-based values. That being said, for me, the biggest benefits I see are pretty much as a beautiful community, when it's done correctly. It gives you a sense of belonging, part of something. They also encourage, rest and some type of like meditation in certain religions. There's also love and support for those who are marginalized or grieving or struggling. You're a public servant in a way. And then the thing that I think people gravitate towards religions the most, and I also agree with the most, is, it emphasizes moral values like love, compassion, forgiveness, empathy, not to judge, things like that. So to me, there are a lot of benefits to having a faith or going to an organized religious place like church. But yeah, just like you said, trauma happens in all settings and in all communities. So it's us just kind of covering the fact that trauma can happen in this community, and also how that community deals with it, I think, is like the biggest factor that kind of...
Yeah, because I think we're really talking about the hypocrisy of it all, right? Like the message of not judging your neighbor and lending the helping hand and welcoming everybody. Those are all beautiful things, but we know, and again, not to offend anyone, but we know that does not always happen in organized religion. Oftentimes, more than not, it's actually the opposite of that. It's like everything is kind of fit into this one box. And if you follow all the rules, then maybe you won't receive judgment. But if you're anywhere outside of that, it's very not welcoming at all, and very shameful. And so I think, first I just want to share how we're defining religious trauma. And I'll tell you the definition that I found. And of course, you can add to it. But religious trauma occurs when a person's religious experience is stressful, degrading, dangerous, abusive, or damaging. Traumatic religious experiences may harm or threaten to harm someone's physical, emotional, mental, sexual, or spiritual health and safety. So is that kind of aligned with, I guess, the definition, how you would define religious trauma?
Yeah. And the fact that, it occurs whenever someone has like some type of traumatic response to it. Because I looked up the definition, I couldn't find anything other than that article that defined religious trauma, but what I did find on Wikipedia, of course, because we love Wikipedia here, is I found a term that I hadn't heard before, which was religious trauma syndrome, which is RTS.
Okay.
And I learned that it's not present in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, the DSM that you guys use, or any DSM text revision materials, nor is it represented in the ICD-10.
Yeah, the ICD-10 is just different like diagnostic codes. So if you're officially diagnosing someone, they'll all have an ICD-10 code. But if it's not in the DSM, I would imagine it doesn't have an ICD-10 code because I guess it's not an official diagnosis, but it's still. I've never heard that term, but I wouldn't be surprised if down the road it became like an official diagnosis because I'm relating it to. Have you ever heard of CPTSD, like complex PTSD before?
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah. So, PTSD is an official diagnosis, but CPTSD, which is the complex part, the C part is not officially a diagnosis, but at least in like the therapy world, you hear it more and more because people's traumas are complex. It's not like one traumatic event happened to you and that's where the PTSD stems from. That could be the case. I'm not saying that could be untrue. But I think a lot of people have various traumas throughout their life that kind of compound. And so then the C is there, the complex part is there. But again, it's not an official diagnosis, it's not in the DSM. But but a lot of professionals do recognize it. Mm-hmm. And that term is probably kind of like that where
it literally says that however it is recognized by individual psychologists and psychotherapists as a set of symptoms ranging in severity experienced by those who have participated in or left behind controlling religious groups and belief systems. Mm-hmm. So that was a new term that I came up with because same thing. Religious trauma was a definition I couldn't really find really easily other than the therapist.com article, which I really liked.
Yeah.
But I've seen many different types. I liked how it said like the ranging in severity because religion in general, like the basic religion that I see on every corner here in Texas is basically it preaches modesty, it preaches abstinence, it preaches public servitude, some type of public servitude also to a higher order, and typically it preaches some type of like male hierarchy, patriarchy, society. But then we go to the really extreme where some religions will preach no pants for women, no music. No, women are responsible for men's sexual desires. They teach coercive control, which is kind of crazy. Religion can span such a big, just this topic, throwing in religious trauma and the impacts sent me down like such a huge rabbit hole. It was actually really hard for me to focus.
Yeah, I think this is going to be very much a general overview type of episode, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if in the future we did more specific episodes, like one tiny section of what we're talking about, because religious trauma can impact in very big ways.
Yeah.
And so to do this in one episode, you're right, it does send you down a rabbit hole where you're just like, gosh, what are we going to be able to cover today?
Exactly. That was my exact thought. I was just like, my goodness, this is such a big and heavy topic. Because it gets crazy. So one thing I did want to bring up was basically the term that I learned recently was spiritual abuse, which I'm assuming is kind of the cause of a lot of religious traumatic experiences. So the definition of spiritual abuse is a harm or mistreatment of another, often for the purpose of exerting power or control. Spiritual abuse occurs when a person's religion or spirituality is used to exert control over another person. So that's where that coercive control kind of comes in.
Totally. It's weaponized.
Yeah.
It's not really left up to the person to decide, do I want to believe this or not? It's very much weaponized in the name of, you have to believe and you have to do it this certain way and you have to behave this certain way. Otherwise, there will be grave consequence, which is, coercion is the right word, because I'm even thinking of, jumping forward a little bit, because we're going to talk about how this impacts your relationships and your sex life. It's very much like sexual coercion. It's like if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to guilt trip you. I'm going to make you feel bad. I'm going to be in a bad mood. I might possibly hurt you if you don't do this. So then people cave and they give in. And sometimes religion is weaponized that way too. And it's very shameful. It really puts people in a position of you lose who you are in that, right? Because now you're just following some order.
Yeah.
So the spiritual abuse, I mean, that makes total sense that is, I mean, related to the religious trauma, because it is traumatic. It is abusive when you don't really get to consent.
With the consent.
It's the consent. Yeah.
When I was looking through the research, a lot of past like documentaries or true crime stories would come to mind. A lot of them were ones that I watched recently. Like, we are a big Swoop fan here in this podcast. But yeah, I was watching Swoop's documentary on the Duggar family, which was a big TLC family, which they were, I want to say, I'm pretty sure it was Christian based, but they taught fear tactics, right? That was the biggest thing, things that weren't said in the Bible, things that weren't, preached, in that text, but that their religious authorities would tell them that if they did these certain actions, that there would be some divine consequences.
Yes.
The one that I remember the most is one of the Duggar children was told a story. Basically, music is evil, apparently, especially the drums. The drums is a very evil instrument. So rock music just inherently is an evil genre of music. So one of the stories that was told to her as a kid was that a boy who was listening to rock music as he was driving down a highway and then ended up getting in a crash and dying because, God was punishing him, was the moral of the story, because he was listening to, the drums.
Yeah.
Right. So I see all these fear tactics, and I've seen them even in the queer community, right? If you engage in homosexual activity, you're going to hell. So I see a lot of religious authorities. That's like one of their favorite ways to.
Well, it's all based in fear. It's all based in fear. It's like, you will do what is expected of you in the name of fear. And when has that ever been a good motivator?
No.
It never has been. I mean, if you're doing something out of fear, then you probably don't want to do it, but you don't have a choice. You feel like you don't have a choice to do it. And it's crazy when you tell kids stories like this, because kids are very literal. Like they're very impressionable. They're very literal. And they can pick up what you're putting down. Like, essentially, if I find you listening to rock music, like, you could die.
Yeah.
And kids kids are just like terrified of that. Someone I knew grew up in the Catholic Church, and they're queer. And at the time, like, weren't out to anyone. They were still a teenager, but they're not out to anyone because they know being queer is a sin, probably really afraid to tell anyone that at the time. Well, there was this play at the church, and the play was basically this train to hell. And the people on the train were like sex workers, queer men, people who do drugs, people who are alcoholics, people who steal. And so basically it was like the shitty people of society are on this train to hell. And this person, I remember them telling me the whole time, they kept thinking, like, please don't let a gay person be one of the people on this train. Well, of course. Was. This is a play in the church. And this person, because of how young they were, took it literally learned at the church. Because of who you are, you're going to hell.
Yeah. You will literally be on the train.
You will literally be on the train to hell with all the other people who are, scum of the earth. And so when we're talking about hypocrisy, it's like, how welcoming and loving is that play? You get what I mean? Like, you're only loved and welcomed if you're not on that train.
If you fit in this box.
Yeah. And so then that's where the trauma comes in, is like, if who you are doesn't fit in that box, something is wrong with you. So you need to shove it down. You need to fit into this box. And then you go through life and you become an adult, and there's like a misalignment, right? It's like, I'm living this life, but that's not really the life I want to live. For a lot of people, I think. A
lot of people, yeah.
And that's very traumatic, just inherently traumatic to live that way, I think.
No, I completely agree. And actually, on that note, just for my listeners and my audience members, I do want to go through pretty much the signs of spiritual abuse. So if you have experienced this, or you have someone who is going through this. I'm not saying that spiritual abuse is like apparent, but just throwing out there that the signs are there. All right. So has someone ever used or attempted to use my religious beliefs or practices to manipulate me into certain actions? Am I free to practice my faith at home? That's a big one. Has a parent or partner ever tried to force their religion on me? I feel like a lot of the queer community is shouting right now. Have my religious leaders ever tried to justify domestic violence or protect known abusers? Also a big thing. Has a boss ever limited my ability to work or the opportunity for promotion based on my express belief in or disavowal of a certain faith? Have my religious leaders ever recommended I stay in an abusive or harmful situation in order to grow closer to my God? Do I have freedom of choice in how I live my life, raise my children, interact with my partner, and so on? Or are those decisions made for me by the religious leaders? So these are pretty much signs.
The ones about will your religious leaders convince you to stay in an abusive situation in the name of God happens all the time. And I can tell you that from experience as a therapist. Like, if I've worked with victims of domestic violence and they're in a religious household, I don't think any of them have ever really told me otherwise. Like, if they've gone to a member of the church or someone who's like a leader in the church to talk about it and basically disclose abuse, it's almost like preserving the marriage is more important because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yes.
So not only are you going through trauma at home, there's another trauma added on to that where you're being convinced to stay in it. That's, to me, feels very traumatic. It feels almost like gaslighting to me.
Yeah,
like
I'm being heard.
Yeah, I'm coming to you with this serious thing. Like, I'm literally being harmed, and you're telling me that it's really not that big of a deal.
It's crazy how often and common it is, to the point where it's normalized.
Yes.
Because to be honest, I mean, I have a very personal experience with that in my parents. My mom was always raised, very religious based as well, but very the man has final say. You're supposed to keep him happy. If he hits you, then obviously you might have done something wrong to cause it. So these were just values that were very apparent, especially in the religious community, apparent especially in the Hispanic community, where the husband is a patriarch. He is the leader. And women, we are supposed to follow, and whatever treatment we get is just something that we have to figure out how to prevent or not provoke.
Yeah. And that's the gaslighting, right? It's, well, what have you done to provoke them, or what have you not done that could help?
Yeah.
Right? Well, try this, try that. Maybe it's because you're not doing this enough for them. And what I want everyone to know is that no matter what you do, you don't deserve abuse. But that's not the message that you get from the church a lot of times. It really just feels like husband is the head of household and marriage should be preserved at all costs. You know?
Yeah.
I've even seen those diagrams, or like the what is it? It's almost like a ladder of who is most important in the household. And the wife is usually at the bottom somewhere. It's like God, man of the house, kids, and then the wife. Maybe the wife is above the kids sometimes, but basically the wife and kids are like lowest priority, and God's the top priority, and the husband is directly underneath God.
Yeah. So during this research, we have a mutual friend who sent me an article, which I'm going to have you pull up soon. But part of the article that I took away from is that there's different social classes. And obviously, guys, this is in certain religions. But yeah, apparently the modern day social classes that we're taught is pretty much, that you have your parents and you have your children. That's the paradigm, is adults, children. But in certain biblical teachings and the way it to this specific author it should be, is there's 3 social classes. There's men at the top who have complete autonomy, women below them who are supposed to follow and listen to their husband or their male leader, and then children who are supposed to respect and obey their parents, you know, both mother and father. And when I saw that, I was just like, oh wow, so yeah, this is literally why the feminist movement was
so
made.
The dads always have the say is essentially what it is. They lead, the women follow, and the kids follow their parents. But there is no opinion of mom in there. It's just what it's dad has the final say. Yeah, you know, you were sharing some questions that, you know, people can answer to see, have they ever experienced spiritual abuse? And I have a list here, and this is from another website called antiloneliness.com. And we'll share these links with you guys in the episode description. But this is 5 examples of religious trauma. So kind of like 5 examples of what religious trauma can look like, right, as examples. And so the first one is suggesting that the lack of faith can result in an illness like cancer, right? Like if you're not obeying God, then you are at risk of some kind of natural
God's wrath.
harm. Yeah, I mean, really. The next one is shaming someone not getting married or having an abortion. That's a huge one. That's a huge one, especially being where we live. I feel like here in the South, the shaming of not getting married is a big one. How old was I when I got married? 32 when I got married.
Okay.
But you would think I was like 100 years old. I mean, seriously, like being 25 years old, it's that constant question, like, are you seeing anyone? Are you dating anyone? Like, are you going to get married? Do you want to get married? I just remember those questions always happening. And it just makes you feel like you've missed the boat or something. Like there's something wrong if you haven't gotten married yet. And it's like, holy shit, give me a break.
Can we normalize waiting till you're like literally an adult, like a practicing successful adult, before you make like these huge financial and life altering decisions? Like to me, same thing. My wife is from a very traditional Hispanic family, and the entire time since I met her at 19 till 20, we got married, she was 26, 25, 26, I don't know. From 19 to 25, literally every time we went over there, it was like, when you getting married, when you having kids, like that was the only thing they ever wanted to know.
Yeah.
Like that's it.
and it just goes back to, you're not a person until you do these things that you're expected to do. And it's like, I'm an interesting person, and I was interesting before I got married too. So that, you know, that's the second one. And then the third one is internal shaming. And so feeling like something is wrong with you for thinking or behaving in a way that is slightly different to the beliefs and practices of your religion. That one is huge. And it does not take much for it to turn into internal shame. You have a slight difference in what you want to do with your life as opposed to what is expected of you through religion. There must be something wrong with you. And so again, it's that internal conflict of what I should do versus what I want to do. There's no autonomy in that, right?
Yeah.
Number 4 is being told that your feelings are sinful if you experience same-sex attraction, of course.
Yeah, of course.
One of the biggest sins. I'm sitting with the sinner here, everybody.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Proud, too.
And then the last one that they had on their list is being ostracized for having sex out of wedlock.
Yes.
And this is often paired with feelings of shame and regret. And I feel like women and girls get that a lot more than men and boys do. I feel like the purity culture, like, not that it doesn't impact men and boys, it does, but it especially impacts women and girls.
Yeah.
You know, because it just seems like guys are kind of allowed to have sexual desire and women need to suppress it because they should not be tempting men.
I was about to say, it's always on the responsibility.
It is on the responsibility of the female. I think it impacts them more. So those are all signs of what religious trauma looks like. And, you know, those can really manifest in many different ways.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I have the symptoms. So I have a slide that just is specific symptoms of religious trauma. And it gives me 5 different categories. And I'll try to get through this pretty fast. But the first one being cognitive. So this is pretty much confusion, difficulty with decision making and critical thinking, disassociation, identity confusion, or we can go the other way, perfectionism. The other category is affective symptoms. So anxiety, panic attacks, depression, suicidal
ideation.
Suicidal ideation. Thank you. Anger, grief, guilt, loneliness, self-hatred, shame.
I just have to point out real quick before you
Go ahead.
continue going. As someone who is a mental health professional, there is a link between mental illness and religious trauma.
Interesting.
There is. There's been studies on it. There's reports on it. There's data on it. It is a proven fact. So you're listing off anxiety, depression, panic attacks. 100% can stem from religious trauma.
Oh, yeah. And that's the next category is functional. So that's where we get into sleep and eating disorders. We get into nightmares, sexual dysfunction, which we will cover in detail.
Absolutely.
Substance abuse, somatization, and then PTSD and OCD. So yeah, like Lyndsey said, these are very much disorders or issues that can be a direct result from religious trauma. And the other two categories I have is social cultural, so the rupture of family and social network, employment issues, financial stress, problems fitting into society, interpersonal dysfunction, loss of community, lack of boundaries. Because apparently in the religious communities, having someone pretty much weigh in on your life and your relationships and everything is something that's like a normal thing. So whenever you lose that community, that boundary has never been developed, right?
Yeah.
And then the last one I have is developmental delay.
Yeah.
This is the one we're definitely going to cover. It's pretty much emotional, intellectual, social, or sexual immaturity, which stems from typically purity culture, resulting from the control of information and discouragement of critical thinking within religious environments. And yeah, like you said, religious trauma has also been linked to several results such as suicide and homicidal actions.
Because there's so much repression.
Yes.
There's so much repression. You cannot be who you are.
Nope.
And at a certain point, you're gonna break. You're going to break, right? Whether it's harm to yourself, harm to others, and even if it's not physical harm, it could be emotional harm, right? And going back to a couple things you said, like the critical thinking skills, you're not allowed to have critical thinking skills. If you're now again, we're really talking about those very confined, constrained, extreme religious dynamics, okay? So, if you grew up religious, but maybe lightly, I don't have another word for it, but like lightly religious, maybe you're not experiencing some of what we're talking about, but more people experience this than you would think. But when it's really restricted and confined and coercive, and
when there's like rules that you must
follow and there's going to be a consequence if you don't, there is no room for critical thinking skills. And then when you become an adult, you are developmentally delayed because you can't think for yourself. And then when you can't think for yourself, what a vulnerable person. And the really sad thing is when you're that vulnerable, it's easy to be taken advantage of. They're kind of the perfect person to be taken advantage of if you've never been able to critically think. And then if you're so vulnerable to being taken advantage of, unfortunately, and I am not victim blaming when I say this, but unfortunately, that very type of person is set up to have a new trauma happen to them. You get what I mean? Like it's just this domino effect. And so you miss that big piece of like, how do you think for yourself? It's a skill you have to learn and develop over time. But you have to be allowed to do it.
Yeah, when I think, and this is going to sound very judgmental, and I apologize, this was literally just my experience of me being young or just me observing other people. Is anytime I see someone who is hyper religious or hyper sheltered and, they have strict rules they must follow, there is a sense, and I don't know if you guys feel the same way with anybody, there's a sense of immaturity that I get from them. There's a sense of like, they're really sheltered, so they just don't know about the world. They just
naive.
Don't know.
Yeah, it's very naive.
Is a really good way. And the way they look at me, because obviously I'm a very queer, sinful woman, is that I'm too knowledgeable. I've dabbed in the devil's pool or something like, I've pretty much I've allowed sin to corrupt my brain. So it's just like that. It's almost like a catch-22 of, now that I'm thinking about it, it's almost like red pill, blue pill.
Yeah. It's one extreme or the other, and that's it. And it's just like being very sheltered. I mean, even going back to sex, like we're not talking about it. You're not going to do it before marriage. You don't even consider having a same-sex relationship. Like, whoa, that is like your whole family is going to disown you. That's another thing too that is traumatic about all of this is that if someone in the family decides they no longer want to be a part of that religion or they do something that is against what that religion says, people have been disowned by their family.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So even if your family has maybe not the healthiest dynamic, that's still your support system, and you could just lose them if you even allow yourself to be who you are for one moment. That in and of itself is really traumatic as well. To just feel like I'm easily discarded is the feeling that it is.
Yeah, obviously we talked about the causes and the symptoms, but the two overarching, like on the big umbrella that I saw as far as religious trauma, the effects are either I'm in this religion and I don't align with their teachings and I'm going through that and I'm suffering through that self-hatred, judgment, or B, I've decided to accept myself, but now I have to be okay with the loss of community and family. So those are like the two.
So it feels like a lose-lose.
It's a lose-lose.
It's a lose-lose. I be who I am and I'm more true to myself, but I lose my whole support system, or I just shove it all down and keep my support system. Yep. And so when people are really having that struggle of like, what do I do? It could take a long time to unpack, like, how do you make that decision, right? And you can never really tell anyone what the right decision is for them. That's really, really hard, you know? And it's just randomly popped up in my head, but it's like the hypocrisy of it all. Because you mentioned the Duggars earlier. Something I always found so interesting about them is that I think this was the Duggars, they're not allowed to watch TV at all.
Yep.
But they're being filmed for TV in their house. Yeah. And so it's just like...
They're not allowed to consume any reality TV.
But they're reality TV. They're literally reality TV.
They're
and so it's just
consumed by.
As long as they get money out of it. Yeah. I mean, so it's...
Or the father. By the way, the kids never got paid for the 16 years they were on television. Yeah.
I'm not surprised by that at all. I'm not surprised. I think one of the Duggars, one of the girls who got married, said that like her dad had some contract. I could not think of their names, who it was, but this is when one of the girls like became an adult. She gets married and her husband were like part of the show, but in a new way. And they had like their own channel, but the dad was kind of like in control of the contracts. And so he had this contract typed up where basically they weren't going to get any money. And so of course her and her husband were like, no, we don't want to sign it. Like, we deserve to get paid. Like, this is our work too. Yeah. He just signed it for them, like forged it. And there was no consequence for that. Like, it was never like, well, now this contract is void. No, it just went along how he signed it. I mean, insane. And so it's a very controlled, like, again, dad's the head of the household. Whatever he says is going to be what it is.
Yep. Good old Jim Bob. Yep.
Yeah, Jim Bob, that's his name.
But okay, so the next thing I want to get into is pretty much the sexual dysfunction. So what I learned was religions that overemphasize purity culture may not prepare their followers for healthy sex lives, even in the context of marriage, which is something you and I have discussed before. Yeah. But many people who struggle with religious trauma practice abstinence until marriage, and they may feel guilt or dirty when engaging in sex. People from religious backgrounds that preach traditional gender roles also may struggle to confront realities about desire and drive and performances that don't align with what they've learned. And then some religions teach about sex in a way that centers obligation instead of consent, resulting in unhealthy, harmful, or even criminal sexual behaviors.
You know, the last thing you said of like criminal sexual activity, this is where spousal rape comes into play. And I think with the lack of education, kind of like sex is preserved for husband and wife. Therefore, I can't rape you because you're my spouse. Like, if I want to have sex, we're going to have sex. That piece of information can be really shocking when someone is, I guess, really deconstructing and processing this religious trauma, is that even the fact that you can be raped by your spouse is new information. Like, it couldn't have been that because I was married to them. But again, like we said before, you have to get consent every time. And there's so much coercion in religious trauma that you're not getting consent every time. It is an obligation. I have to do it. And then there's no space for desire, like your own natural desire. And then because sex is the only right way to do it is within a marriage and between a man and wife, and usually with the purpose of like creating children. If you have a desire outside of that, that's where the guilt and shame come in, right? Like, oh, I had a fantasy, or I saw someone else that I was attracted to, or I had a dream about sex with someone else, or maybe I have a fantasy that I want to have a threesome or whatever. Like, who knows what it is? They can have it for a second and it's like, oh, but I shouldn't be thinking that way. There's something wrong with me. I need to shove that away, like get back in the game, right? And stick to the box that you have to stick to because that's the right thing to do. That is just the perfect recipe for low self-worth, depression, anxiety. And I kind of have, even more here. Right, difficulty with making decisions because your only decision-making skill is just to do the right thing.
Oh,
even
yeah.
Even if that doesn't align with what you want, it's like just do the right thing, and that's the only thing I need to.
And
make
the right thing is what was taught to me by my authorities.
Yes, exactly. And then also, like with all this that we're talking about, the development of perfectionism. Perfectionism is just at its core an avoidance of anxiety. If I can just get everything perfect, I can then avoid what brings me shame, what brings me anxiety. Like, I don't have to worry about making a mistake. Okay. So even now, like speaking of being developmentally behind, you never learn that it's okay to just make a mistake. Because like in a healthy dynamic, like if we're working on this podcast and you make a mistake, I'm just going to give you grace for that.
Yeah.
But if I'm like yelling at you and telling you to like get your shit together, this is a sin. This is against what we're supposed to do. You need to get back in line. You never learn how to just make a mistake. And therefore perfectionism is the solution to that. It's like, just be perfect. And I can avoid getting yelled at, or I can avoid making someone like really upset. And in a healthy dynamic outside of religious trauma, it's like you can make mistakes, or you can disagree with someone, or you can tell someone that you're upset and they're not going to get mad at you. That's another thing about religiosity too, is I feel like there's this dynamic where you're not allowed to discuss negative emotions, and therefore it ends up creating more negative emotions. Like if something has hurt me, like let's say something the church did hurt my feelings, but I'm not allowed to admit that because the church is always right.
Yeah.
If I'm not allowed to admit that and I just keep it to myself, I just shove it down, it just like perpetuates that cycle of like anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. Like I'm alone.
Yeah.
I'm very isolated. So I just think of all that when I think about perfectionism. And then when you talk about perfectionism within sex, and I've seen this in my practice, if everything has to be just right for sex to happen in a marriage, there's always sexual anxiety. Every single time. It has to be just right. It has to be at this time. It has to be in bed. The door has to be locked. It has to be only missionary. It has to be only between us. We can't talk about it. We can't do anything aside from this one position. It has to be with the purpose of making children. And it's like the checklist just gets longer and longer and longer. And then, when they come to my office and they're like, even if someone wants to spice things up, they don't know how because it's just too hard. It's just too hard.
It's
too
no longer fun.
It's no longer fun. It's anxiety inducing. And so like getting into the sexual dysfunction, there's all of this can cause so many things. And I'm actually going to share something with you really quickly. And again, I'll share this link in the episode description. But it's a research article, and it's written by Jane Wu and Lori Brotto, and it's called Sex Guilt Mediates the Relationship Between Religiosity and Sexual Desire in East Asian and Euro-Canadian College-Age Women. It's a very specific title. But the gist of it is the research that they found is that strict religious upbringing, such as like Judaism, Catholicism, and I want to say Pentecostal, is the last one that they mentioned. But those are some examples. Strict religious upbringings is associated with sexual dysfunction, such as erectile dysfunction, anorgasmia, and vaginismus. And so for anyone listening that maybe doesn't know what those terms are, erectile dysfunction is when you have difficulty getting an erection or maintaining one. Anorgasmia is when you've never had an orgasm. And then vaginismus is for anyone that has a vagina, if your like vaginal muscles tighten as soon as penetration starts. And so it can be really painful.
Yeah.
So I'm sharing all of that as some proof and some research that shows this kind of trauma, even though it's psychological, it can impact you physically and your physical sexual dysfunction. And I actually see it quite a bit in my office. I'll get a lot of referrals for vaginismus, erectile dysfunction, because you'll see people go to a urologist, a cardiologist, a pelvic floor therapist, and while all those things are good and that might be all you need to do to resolve those issues, a lot of the time it's psychological because your body's like holding on to this trauma. So it's very interesting. It can impact you in so many ways. And, if sex is painful or shameful or guilt-inducing, anxiety-inducing, why would you want to do it?
True. Actually,
why would you want to do it? Yeah, it's like that question, like, I don't know why I don't have a desire. I'm like, well, because sex is wrapped up in some shitty feelings.
Yeah,
if it's not fun, it's not desirable. Why would you want to do it?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Quote an episode before, if you would just have fun, the orgasm will come.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with you did mention how as far as religious goes, you're not allowed to talk to people, you're not allowed to pretty much whenever you're having an issues, you're not allowed to address them. I do agree with that. I also have seen the extreme on the other side where the only person you are allowed to address it to is your pastor, right? Like, so that's where confession comes in, where you made a mistake, but you don't think about it. You don't really talk to anyone. You don't address it with the person that you may have harmed or whatever.
Yeah.
You just go into a confessional. You tell your pastor the mistake you made. He gives you a couple of this is my perspective. You get a couple of Hail Marys that you have to do, and then you're absolved of that mistake completely. But you've never addressed it. So yeah, I've seen both extremes where either A, they bottle up inside, they don't tell anybody because they don't feel comfortable with their pastor or their bishop or whoever their authority is, or if you've done something really shitty, you are allowed to pretty much confess it to that one person and that the only person. And then from there, you're pretty much absolved from whatever that mistake was.
Yeah. And there is no understanding within that.
No.
There's no understanding. And I'll even bring it back to the work I do with couples, even if it's not based in religious trauma or even in a sexual context. But I mean, that would be the equivalent of, I don't know, like I hit my husband's car and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry I hit your car. And he says, oh, that's fine. Thanks for telling me. And that was the end of the conversation. Yeah. There's more to discuss, right? Yes. Like there's more to this conversation and you don't just like apologize and move on. Yeah. There's more to explore, but there's no room to explore.
Exactly, yeah.
So that is really the incongruence, the conflict, is that exploring and being curious, those are all very beautiful things. You can learn about yourself, someone else can learn about you, but there is no room for that. And I don't know how you have a vulnerable, loving relationship without being able to do that.
Agreed.
You know what I mean?
Man, something that was sent to me over the weekend was 7 steps to grooming your Christian wife, right?
Oh, I think I was sent the same article.
Girl,
yes. I couldn't really read it.
I read all of it.
I couldn't read it. No,
all
it was too much for me.
Girl, yes, it was.
I just stopped. I was like, nope. But this was not satire. This was an actual, hey, if you want to groom, this is how you do it.
My eyes were like peeled to my screen. I was in a place where I didn't need to be reading it, but I couldn't stop because I forget that people like this exist. Like I forget that there's these cohorts of people that are literally they get these teachings and they think these things. But pretty much this guy wrote in saying how he wants to pretty much be the leader of his marriage, and his young wife is combative, and he's trying to get permission from his
combative probably just
authority.
has opinions.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. His feminist wife, because they used feminist as a slur in that article as well. But he was like,
I know I'm supposed to take away her debit card as punishment, but is it okay to spank her too?
And like, so I'm reading this article because I'm just like, my flashers in my brain are just going off. But one of the takeaways I got is that I am a humanist. So I didn't know, that was a word I never heard of before. Yeah. Pretty much for the audience who doesn't know, I'm an advocate or follower of the principles of humanism, which, if you don't know what humanism is, it's a democratic and ethical life stance which affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives.
Yes.
Which to me is just a default. Like, I've always thought of that as just, that was my upbringing. You know, you're responsible for yourself, your own actions, and you're responsible in ensuring that you have a very fulfilled, happy life, right? And the fact that that was used as kind of a slur just floored me. Jaw floor. Like, it was crazy.
It's essentially saying, if you think everyone deserves to make their own decisions, you're not very godly.
Yeah, that's exactly what
and it's like, well, okay then. I don't want to be godly then.
Yeah, I read the entire article. It was shocking how just the concept of disciplining your wife. And, you know, he even has an article apparently on 7 ways to discipline your wife, was just something that is being taught in modern day society. Like, it literally shocked me.
And it's like, why are we disciplining our spouse? Why are we like, there's no world. I cannot think of one scenario where it would be like, yeah, you should discipline your spouse. No, I'm not, like, that's not my role as a spouse. Agreed. That makes no sense.
I'm rolling back like my memories, and I'm trying to think of a time where I disciplined my wife, and I can't think of one. I don't know.
Because
Sam, let me know.
Yeah, because it wouldn't be, that makes no sense. You would not have a healthy marriage if that's what you were doing to Sam. And like, this all really goes back to boundaries, which again, in religious trauma, you can't really have boundaries because you don't have a say. You don't have your own opinion. Yeah. Boundaries are about what you're going to do, not about what the other person is going to do. And so, like, this is like a misconception, but people will think, like Denise, let's say I thought you disrespected me and I said, hey, don't talk to me that way. That's not really a boundary because I can't control how you're going to talk to me. I could say that over and over and over. Don't talk to me that way. Don't talk to me that way. You can talk to me however you want to. The boundary is what I'm going to do. It's more like, if you keep doing this, I'm going to leave. I'm going to exit the conversation. I no longer want to be here. I'm done, right? That is how things should work, even in a marriage. If I feel like my husband is doing something that I don't like, it's not my role to discipline him. I can't give him a consequence. All I can do is control me, right? Like, I don't like this. If you're going to keep doing it, here's what I'm now going to do, right? Okay. And so, just the term discipline, like, gives me just the heebie-jeebies.
We see on TikTok and all the social medias, you got to train your wife, you got to train your husband.
I don't like that at all. Nope.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, before we go into the recovery, I do want to just mention that because of the topic at hand, I absolutely knew that I should reach out to my queer community. So I went into the lesbian group and I pretty much posted the question of, I'm researching this topic, how, as far as religious trauma, how did it impact you? How did you overcome it? And I did not expect the flood of responses that I got from my queer community.
Really?
Like, I've asked pretty much every episode we've had, I've asked some question in order to get kind of their input.
But this was the question that got you a ton.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow, and novels too. So I'm just gonna read a couple of those
Sure.
responses. So the first one I'm gonna read is pretty much religious trauma played a direct role in my sexual relationships. I grew up in a very conservative Christian home where purity was preached. Abstinence meant you were a good girl. Sex was
Mm.
bad, and I didn't believe a lick of it. I rebelled to the highest degree and had a fuck ton of promiscuous sex instead. Other trauma played a much bigger role in the degree of toxicity in my relationships and how I behaved as a whole, but I remember thinking many times that I was worthless because I had promiscuous sex and that it made me filthy and unclean because of the religious indoctrination I grew up with.
Oh, that's terrible.
Oh, yeah, girl. Oh, no.
Well, and real quick, just
Yeah, go
reading
ahead.
that, religion is also very black and white. Everything is either good or bad,
Accurate. Yes.
right? It's all or
Yeah.
nothing. It's good or bad. It's this or that. Humans are not that simple.
No.
None of us are all good. None of us are all bad. So even that, you're good if you're abstinent, you're bad if you have sex.
But that's kind of what we're taught, especially
That is
growing
what
up
we're
with
taught.
the abstinence
Yes.
first thing is
Yes.
that's the right way to do things.
Mhm.
Everything else is wrong.
Mhm.
Right. Okay, and then I had another person come at me saying, I grew up in a religious home. I was always terrified my parents would find out and ship me off to pray the gay away camp. I feel like I had to live in a constant state of fear all the time, which is a very common experience. I actually had an ex who was sent off to a pray the gay away camp for like I want to say a year and a half, 2 years.
Oh my gosh, that's such a long time.
Girl.
Torture.
And I mean, they kicked her out because she was still having sex with her classmates. But
as you would.
As you would. Yeah. I mean, hey. But yeah, I mean, this is again very real testimonials. All right, the next person I have is, man, my core wounds from religious trauma have contributed to me sabotaging meaningful connections. I thought I'd unfucked most of it, but these last few years have proved me wrong. Some lingering aspects of it ran my life and ruined a lot of good things for me. Religion, in my opinion, can be an extremely harmful thing for someone to endure and can take a lifetime to deconstruct.
Yes.
Your trauma response can cause you to hurt people that you truly love along the way because of core beliefs you didn't know you had. Some days I still struggle to not shame myself for my past or the people I've hurt, but it's so damn hard sometimes. For anyone that's experiencing this or has experienced it, I empathize with you. So, yeah. This one is, religious trauma directly affects my life and relationship often. I am the daughter of a former pastor in an independent fundamentalist missionary Baptist household. That was a mouthful. And I have experienced guilt and self-hatred most of my life. I've talked to my mother about it. I think she gets why it's a trigger for me to talk about religion and faith now, so I'm making progress. I see therapists regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one I have is, I grew up in a purity culture in a Southern Baptist megachurch in suburban Orlando, Florida, as a closeted queer and trans woman. I'm a youth leader, played piano with the church orchestra at the age of 12. I first came out as an extremely feminine gay boy at 16, and by that point had realized how toxic the church's teachings were about gender roles and abstinence. I had a 7-year relationship in my 20s with a boyfriend who actually is one of my closest friends now, but it was on the verge of a sexless relationship. I had gender dysphoria, and the effects of evangelical purity culture wreaked havoc on my emotions. I worked through so much of it, including now being 3 years into HRT. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm.
Having transitioned and waiting on July for my final gender affirming surgery, and have dealt with overcoming my own religious trauma after a therapy and having a healthy emotional development. Whatever repression I faced and felt has been addressed in therapy, both group and individual setting. And I facilitate a small group for QCF, Queer Christian Fellowship, QCF, a super affirming queer people of faith group, despite that somewhere I believe I'm agnostic now. So yeah, pretty much the testimonies that I got from the queer community was vast, and those are just me picking a couple.
Well, and the overall theme is, it does make you have a core belief, or it can make you feel this way, that you have a core belief that you're not worth very much. And so one of the testimonials you read just now of someone mentioning, like, they'll self-sabotage good relationships or they'll harm people that they really care about, like, I always think of it as, instead of self-sabotaging, it's self-protecting, because it's that belief of, I'm not worth your love, and so I'm going to push you away before you inevitably push me away, because you're not going to really want to be with me. You're going to realize how worthless I am, so I'm going to push you away first, and people will do it without even realizing it. I mean, that's the thing. It's not like a conscious thought. It's just the core belief is, I'm worthless. No one good would ever want to be with me. So if someone good shows me interest, I'm going to push them away first. And then I prove my point where I'm like, see, they didn't want to be with me. They left, but it's because you pushed them away, It's really, really like deep rooted, and it can harm good relationships. And it's really sad, because it's that belief of, I'm not worth anything. I'm not good enough. I'm not deserving of a good, healthy relationship, because who I am is inherently bad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Almost like you're causing a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah. So, So, girl, getting into, because I know we have to get into recovery soon and how to deal with it. When I looked up how to recover from religious trauma, I found almost nothing other than therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm biased here, but I would find a therapist, but I would find a secular therapist.
Okay.
Who has some experience with working with clients who are deconstructing religion. And I'm going to be totally biased when I say this, and I apologize if like any therapists are listening and take offense. But I wouldn't go and see a faith-based counselor, even if you want to remain in your faith. I can see why you might want to go see a faith-based counselor. Just in my experience, faith-based counselors or Christian-based counselors typically don't have that experience of helping people walk through that journey of deconstructing religion. And so finding a secular therapist, I think, helps. And in the therapy that you're doing with them, it's a lot of meaning making. So you're making meaning of your life experience in your own way. Because really the meaning you have, probably if you're like at the very beginning of your journey of self-discovery, the meaning is, I'm not worth very much, and I've been harmed, and I don't really have anyone that I can trust. And there's always like negative meanings, right, associated with it, because of course, how could it be any different, right? And so when you're walking through this journey, you're kind of making your own meaning as you discover who you really are. So the goal is like getting you closer to who you really want to be. Right? And what is that going to look like for you? So it's a really complex journey. I guess what I'm saying is, even if you go to therapy, there's not like a one size fits all approach. It's just having a therapist who is going to be trauma informed, recognizing that this is a trauma. This is not just, I didn't like the church. No, like this is a legitimate trauma. Someone who can affirm that and who's going to guide you to, well, who do you really want to be? And whoever you want to be is fine. Like, no matter how that ends up landing for you, right? So therapy is good. But I would also say a support system is equally as important, because I don't think you can go through that journey alone. I don't think you can overcome religious trauma without a support system.
Okay.
And a lot of times, and again, this may not be true for everybody, but if like the church has done you a lot of harm, or the religiosity in your family has done you a lot of harm, finding a support system outside of that tends to be more helpful. Like people who maybe can relate to your situation, or who have found a way to keep their faith, but have also found a way to be themselves, or someone who's gotten out of the religion completely. Like whatever's going to relate more to you, that kind of support matters a lot, because you've got a team on your side saying, hey, what you went through was traumatic, and it's okay to view it that way. Okay. And it's also okay to be who you want to be,
Okay. I would say that's a very nuanced approach, because from what I've seen as far as an outsider perspective is typically whenever someone's having any issue in whether it's within the church or even just not including religion or any type of just non-religious issue, if you're faith-based or you're devout, the people that you do go for advice and your mentors will explicitly tell you to not see a I guess a humanist or secular counselor,
Yeah.
right? They will specifically say, actually, if anything, they don't even tell you to go see a certified therapist. I will tell you to get counseling in the church.
Yeah.
Right. That's usually what I've seen. So, I mean, I could
I
see why your
would-
advice would be that.
Oh, yeah. I would definitely find counseling outside of the church, because you can get counseling inside the church, but those aren't licensed professionals. And in my experience with secular counselors, I'm actually on a secular counselor directory. It's called
Okay.
Secular Therapy Project. And so people can go in there, and any therapist you find on there is going to be secular. I feel like secular therapists are really good at not only not shaming you, but not shaming your religion either. Like me as Lyndsey, as a person, I have some very strong opinions against the church.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if I have someone coming in who is maybe really struggling with that, I want to keep my faith, I don't know what that means to me, but the church is hurting me and I don't want to go back to church anymore. If they're really kind of in that struggle, I'm never going to take that approach of shitting all over the religion they come from, because it's still important to them, right? It's still like, it feels like it's a piece of who they are. And so if that's where they're at, I'm also not going to judge that part either.
Of course, yes.
But I feel like when it's reversed, when it's a Christian faith counselor, and again, I'm generalizing here, and I really hope I'm not offending anyone, but I feel like from what I've heard from clients who have gone to see, let's say, a Christian-based counselor, Christian-based counseling can come off very judgmental against things and people that are not in the church. So there's a judgment there, whereas I feel like with secular therapy, we're not here to judge that either. I'm here to meet the client where they are.
I like that. Oh.
And wherever they are, that's what we're going to roll with, right? And so it is very nuanced. It's very nuanced. It's very complicated. And so when someone asks me, like, well, what technique do you use? I don't really know how to answer that. Right? Because it really depends on the client. I'm very person-centered, and depending on what they need, is it a direct trauma technique? Are we talking about attachment theory? Are we talking about like them kind of forming their own narrative? Like what that looks like is just so client dependent, because your journey is going to look different than the person next to you.
Could make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Okay. So before we close it out, though, I do
Mhm.
want to get a little personal here.
Sure.
So what was your upbringing? Like, were you brought up with religion, the church? I know you're here from the South, so I'm assuming
Mhm.
yes, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, Baptist. It was
Okay.
a Baptist church. But I don't really remember. I mean, I remember going to church, but I remember never really being into it.
Okay.
But at the same time,
Family didn't make you go?
my mom did for a while, but it couldn't have been for that long. Because, like, especially when I was in high school, I don't remember going in high school. But I
Okay.
never remember there being, like, a conversation where I had to be defiant or something to not go. Like, I don't really remember that. I just remember we went and then we stopped going, right?
Okay.
My mom is still religious. And for a long time, I would get the guilt trip about, like, going to church, even if I hadn't gone in, like, 10 years. And it's like, well, I haven't gone in 10 years and I'm not going now. And I don't know. I just have a really weird relationship with it. Like, I almost felt like if you were really involved in the church, you were viewed at as a better person. That's
Yes.
how it was in
Yeah.
my town.
That's accurate. Yeah.
That's not, like, you're almost like on this pedestal.
You're holy.
And you're like this authority figure, or you really are important to the community. And I recall always kind of pushing back again. Like, I always just thought it was kind of bullshit. Like, this person's not any more important than me.
Yeah.
But they make you feel that way, or they can make you feel that way.
Oh, for sure.
Mhm.
Yes. No, attendance is required.
Mhm.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is, did you get any type of like sexual education or, maybe preparation or anything whenever you were in your church?
No.
Okay.
It was just, don't do it. You
Yeah.
have to wait until marriage. And it was between man and woman. I mean, like I've said before in a past episode, the idea of a same-sex relationship seemed out of this world to me. I mean, like, I don't really know how to describe it, but when this girl that I went to high school with, when we all found out that she was a lesbian, I really was like, no, there's no way. Like, that doesn't happen. That's, like, so rare. that it wouldn't happen in our small town.
Yeah.
And now I feel like half the town is queer. You
Almost
know,
like a condition.
Yeah, I mean, it just that I don't know how to describe how close-minded I was, even from the small amount of time I spent in the church. You get what I mean? So if you're in the church, if you're really deep in the church, you're in this little bubble. I mean, there is no real world experience. And then when you do get that experience or that exposure, there's so much judgment in it. And at where I'm at in this point in life, it's all so ridiculous.
Yeah, it makes me, doing this research just made me think, if religion didn't exist, like if just throwing that weird, complete left idea out there. So if religion didn't exist, if we didn't like have these set of rules that we had to abide by, I have a feeling that so many more queer people would not be traumatized.
Yes.
Like being proud to be queer wouldn't be such a big thing if the church wasn't just so against it. And then the last thing I really wanted to bring up, because at the same time that we're doing this religion research, we were also doing kind of the kink research too, right? And then that crazy article with how to groom your wife. I see a lot of parallels, and this just might be my logical thinking mind that's not taking into any other inputs. But when I see of a man who really wants a subservient wife, who really wants them to worship him and, you know, pretty much almost be like, you know, this maid of some sort, like this waiting hand. I see parallels to the kink community, girl.
Yeah.
Like I literally see, you know, a dom sub relationship.
You know what I think the difference is between the two?
I can tell
like,
you.
yeah, tell me.
Consent.
But I was going to say respect.
Oh, true. Accurate. Yes.
Because in the kink world, there can be that like master slave, dom sub, whatever. Like you're going to worship me. But at the core, you know that these are two people who do respect each other.
Completely respect
I
and
respect
trust.
you. I love you. I trust you. In this religious context, there's this like subservient wife, but it comes in the name of like, I do not respect you at all. You're beneath me.
Yeah. Like you are required. Yeah. I'm entitled to this respect.
I am entitled. The entitlement too. I feel like in kink, there's not the entitlement.
No.
There's not the entitlement because you walk into it with, because we're doing this out of respect and consent, I'm not entitled to anything from you. If you say no to me on all these things, we don't have to do this.
Yeah.
In the other context,
no, you're required.
Oh, I'm entitled and you're going to fucking do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is so crazy to me because I look at these, you know, these extreme religious people who are literally giving you 7 steps to groom your wife or preaching to these young men that, you know, this is what you should require of your, you know, your younger wife or what, you know, what have you. And I see that and I think of Christian Grey in 50 Shades of Grey. And I think of like the things he wanted. And these are things that, you know, these guys who are practicing this religious sect literally could have if they wanted to willingly. Like they literally could, but they would have to label themselves as kinksters, right?
Yeah.
Which is deviant and perverse and shouldn't.
Sin.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm sitting there and I'm like, you could have what you want. It would just be rooted in respect and consent. And she would actually be willing to give you these things. If you just stepped outside of the box a little bit and didn't force it on someone, if you actually got consent.
Yeah.
So just throwing that out there.
There are a lot of parallels, and the root is so different. It is
so crazy.
It is bizarre.
Yeah, and same thing, community. You get community out of kink. I mean, to me, it's just in kink, it's so much more open of what you want, and you're allowed to talk about it, and you're allowed to do these things that, you know, maybe the outside perspective is like, oh, that's a little extreme. But as long as the 2 consenting adults agree to it, it's fine. It's not traumatic. It's when someone doesn't consent or feels obligated to do something where it becomes an issue.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just throwing that out there.
Oh, that's such a good point. You know, I have 2 last things that I want to say before we wrap this up. Another way to recover from religious trauma is if you're in a safe relationship. Okay, this is not going to be true if you're in an unsafe environment or you're with someone that is emotionally manipulative. But if you're safe, talk to your partner about this stuff. I mean, just simply talking to your partner. Hey, here's where I'm finding that I have hangups because of my religious past. I'm realizing I was traumatized in this way.
Mhm.
I'm realizing I have a need that I didn't know I had, right? Until like this moment, until this thing happened. Sometimes just communicating it with your partner, or if you have more than one partner, communicating it with your partners, is so cathartic and so healing, because again, if you're with a safe person, they're kind of that other piece of the puzzle where they give you that confirmation of you're allowed to talk about this. You can talk about it and I'll validate you and I'll be there for you and I'll support you and I'll let you know that you don't have to replay that dynamic here. That's the stuff that really heals the brain. Like you really need that connection with someone.
You talk about empathy. Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
You're allowing someone to give you the empathy. If you
Yeah.
talk about it, that is just so connected and vulnerable and powerful, and is a really like big way to heal from this. And then the other thing I will say, and this is kind of on an unrelated note, I may be self-promoting here a little bit, but in one of the testimonials you read, it was a trans woman that is doing like hormone
HRT.
HRT.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing HRT.
Hormone replacement therapy.
Something I want to say for anyone listening that is in Texas, because I'm only licensed in Texas, but I've recently started doing gender confirmation surgery or gender affirming surgery letters after one appointment. Because usually you have to have this like well-established therapist, but I've started doing, I see you one time, I just make sure you're okay, and I write you the letter and like send you on your way to get your surgery. So
I'm gonna cry. Yes, thank you, Lyndsey.
yeah, so I'm throwing that out there if anyone is listening and has a surgery coming up or a surgery that they want to get. They are going to ask you for a letter from a mental health professional, and I do write those. And I'm a big believer in that. I'm a huge believer. I've not met anyone that is like bullshitting me. Like the people that come for the one appointment, they know what they want and they're confident in who they are, and this is going to get them closer to where they want to be and who they want to be. So yeah, I offer that. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Love it, guys. All right. I mean, I feel like this was a good episode. I am going to ask a request of my audience and my listeners out there just in the comments. It's such a sensitive topic. So if you have any literature, any advice, anything that you wish you would have known whenever you were going through your own religious trauma, things that helped you recover from it, please throw it in the comments just to help whoever else is out there who really needs that, that extra audiobook, podcast, article, whatever it is.
Yeah, and please like and subscribe and follow us, whether it's anywhere you listen to your podcast, whether you're watching us on YouTube or Spotify. And we are also open now to listener support. And so for as little as $1 a month, you can monetarily support us and help us continue to produce the episodes that we produce and the content that you all want. And as you're writing in the comments, if there's any other topic that you would like us to cover, or even something specific within this episode that you want us to expand upon, let us know. We will absolutely do that. We would love to keep going on this topic. This is a big one.
This is
a huge one. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We can't wait for you to tune in for our future episodes. And again, we are Sex Positivity Unfiltered. And remember to stay curious and fuck politeness.